Hello, this is Elowen. I am the creator of the feather generator, and today I'm going to walk you through how to use it. So to install the feather generator, after you have downloaded the feather generator zip file, you will need to extract the zip. And then inside you should have a feather generator folder and a Blender asset library definition file. Take both of these and copy them and paste them into wherever you store your asset library resources. So for me, I already have them saved here, and keep a note of the address of where you have saved them. So you can click in the address bar and copy it if that is easier. Now inside a new Blender document, go to Edit and then Preferences. Go down to File Paths here, and then in the Asset Library section, click on the plus icon to add a new asset library, and then in the address bar at the top, paste what you have just copied. And then click Add Asset Library. And now you should have a new asset library with the feather generator installed. I'm just going to rename this, and then save your preferences. So once you have added the new asset library, you can just open up the asset library browser by dragging out a new window and then changing it to asset browser. And then just select from this drop-down menu the Elowen 3D asset library. For now, you should only see the feather generator in here, not the wing generator. So to add the feather generator into your scene, first just add a mesh object. So I'm going to add a cube. The size doesn't matter, the default size is okay. And then I'm going to drag and drop the feather generator onto the mesh. Additionally, if you don't want to have your asset browser open, you can also add the modifier through the regular modifier menu by just going to Add Modifier, going down to Elowen 3D, and then clicking on the feather generator from this menu here as well. Okay, so before we get started with making adjustments to the feather, I'm just going to go over a brief diagram of the different parts of the feather. So the feather is divided into three main parts. We have the stem that travels up the entire length of the feather, which is called the quill, and this corresponds to the quill settings in the modifier. There is the fluffier, disorganized barbs at the bottom here, which are called the tuft, and those settings are at the bottom part of the modifier. And then we have the barbs, which make up the majority of the feather shape, and the barb settings are in the middle here. So I'm going to start with going over the quill shape first, and then move into the barbs and tuft, and then at the end we'll go through how the materials in the feather generator work as well. So to start off with, the quill is the centerpiece going up the middle of the feather, and you have two options to control the shape of the quill. You can either input a custom curve, or you can adjust the quill using the settings built into the modifier. So the curve that's built into the modifier is just based off of a simple Bezier curve that has a singular start and end point, and then the subsequent quill bend settings will control the shape of that curve. So starting with the built-in curve that the modifier uses, you can adjust the length of the curve using this length setting here to make the quill longer or shorter. You can adjust the length resolution, so if there's any curvature to the quill itself, it'll help smooth it out by adding more edge cuts. And you can control the thickness of the quill overall with this radius setting to make it thinner or thicker as well. And then to control the resolution of the quill, with these edge loops running along the length of it, you can adjust the radius resolution. So next we have the quill bend. So first you can adjust the height of the tip of the feather to move it either up or down. And don't worry about the misalignment between the barbs and the quill right now. There's a setting that we'll go over later that can fix this. After adjusting the tip height, we can adjust the bend midpoint. So this also relates to the start bend and end bend settings as well. So the bend midpoint determines where along the quill the bend is occurring. So 0 is the very beginning of the feather, and 1 would be the very end of the feather. This setting works best when it's somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't recommend setting it all the way to 0 or 1. So the bend settings for the start and the end work pretty much the same. You can move the handles on the X left or right, or up and down on the Z axis here to get whatever shape you would like. So do something like this. Next, to go over the custom curve option, the way this works is you have to have a separate curve object in your scene. So we can add one now with the Shift A and then add a Bezier. I would recommend using any curve that isn't a closed loop. If it's in a closed loop, then it will likely break the modifier or not work as expected. So I'm just going to edit this curve so that way the orientation is facing the same way as we have the feather now. So now with the desired curve shape blocked out, all you have to do to use it is enable custom curve, and then you can select it from the list here or pick it using the eyedropper tool. And now our feather details are spawning on our custom curve. And if you want to edit the curve, you can still do so at any time by just reselecting the curve object and then going into edit mode and adjusting the handles. Okay, so next up we have the settings for the barbs. So the first thing I'm going to do is increase the total amount of barbs on each side. And I'm just going to go back and adjust the resolution of the quill so that way it's a little bit smoother. So cull random allows you to delete random barbs from the ones that have spawned. The cull random works as a percentage, so 0 means that 0% of the total amount of barbs are being culled, and 1 means that 100% of them are being culled. And you can control which barbs are randomly chosen by adjusting this random seed to get different results. Barb length controls the length of the barbs, so you can make them longer or shorter. And then barb resolution controls how many times the barbs are subdivided along their length to create either a smoother or more low poly curve. We're going to go over the symmetrical length setting a little bit later when we get into some more of the customization graphs that you can use for the feather. So we have under the barb section the left and right settings, so you can change the offset on each side of the feather, determining where the barbs start. So you can start them higher up on the feather or lower down along the quill, and you can do that for the other side as well. You can also change the scale of the barbs on each side independently, so you can make them a little shorter or a little longer. This barb scale setting works along with the barb scale fall off. So by default, the generator will try to keep the tip of the feather connected even when the scale on one side is smaller than the other. But if you change the fall off, it will slowly reduce that effect and allow the feather to become disconnected and take on the full scale value that you have set above. So you have a few options to change the shape of the barb mesh. By default, it is using these flat plane-like cards, but you can also change it to cylindrical in shape, so it's kind of tube shaped instead. Or you can change it to your own custom curve profile as well, which in order to set this up, it's very similar to how you do the custom curve for the quill section up here. You would just add a closed loop or whatever shape you would like in the form of a curve object, and then you would select it in this menu here, and then that would create the new barb shape. So I'm not going to use that now. I'm going to instead change it to cylindrical again. And each of these options has very similar settings. Cylindrical has the most customization options, so we'll go through that. So overall, you can change the base barb width, which is how thick the barbs are. So I'm going to make them a little bit thinner to the value of 0.3. You can change the resolution of the curve profile, which is the cylinder shape. So right now it's 4, so it has 4 edges that go along the circumference of each barb. You can make this higher resolution all the way down to 3 if you want it really low poly. Scale base controls the scale of the barb closer to the quill, so you can make that smaller or larger. And scale tip controls the scale of the ends of the barbs, so make those a little bit finer. And scale tuft allows you to control the thickness of the tuft separately from the rest of the barb, so if you would like to make this thinner or thicker, you can do that as well. Next we have the barb shape. So In addition to adding curvature to the quill, you can also change the curvature of the barbs with a Bezier-like effect as well. So to do that, you just have to add a height value, and you can do this in the positive or negative direction, and this will give the feather more dimension. The midpoint changes where along the barb the bend is occurring. So 0 is closer to where the quill is, and then 1 would be closer to the end of the barb, so 0.5 is like right in the middle. So adjust this here. And then tip flatness allows you to taper off this extra bend detail towards the tip of the feather to help it stay connected here. So 0 means that the tip isn't flat at all, and a value of 1, the tip has been completely flattened out. So next we have the rotation of the barbs. So the barb directionality is the setting that corrects for the barbs not quite aligning with the direction of the feather on the end. So we'll just change the barb directionality to be a little bit higher, so that way towards the end of the feather, it's more aligned with the curve shape. Barb angularity allows you to rotate the barbs along the y-axis when the quill is facing this way, so you can make the feather more compacted by increasing the setting, or less compacted by leaving it towards 0. So for barb convexity, this allows you to fold the barbs kind of like a book. So if you put a value of 1, they fold upwards, and a value of -1 will have them folding downwards. Under rotation, there is also random rotation X here. So this allows you to have each barb rotated a random amount around the quill itself. Next we have barbs trimming. So this will take each barb and shorten it by a random percentage. So to control the overall trimming effect is this trim factor. So 1 means that the full effect of the trimming is allowed to occur on the feather, and then 0 just turns off the trimming. The trim amount is how much each feather can be cut into, and then the random seed will just randomize how much each barb receives trimming. Scale uniform is just included as an extra setting to troubleshoot the overall trimming effect. So if it's not producing the results that you expect, try toggling this on and off and see if that helps with the result. The barb clumping can be controlled independently on the left and right sides of the feather. The settings are exactly the same, so I'm only going to go over one. So clump factor controls the strength of the clumping effect overall. So 0 means it's turned off and 1 means it's turned on. Mask determines how many of the clumps that are generated are masked out. So if we put this to 0, we will see all of the clumps, none of them will be masked. And if we put it to 1, then all of the generated clumps will be masked out. So to see all the clumps that we're generating, I'm just going to leave this at 0 for now. Spacing controls the minimum distance between each new clump that is here. So if you increase the value, you'll have fewer clumps. And if you decrease the value, you'll have more clumps. So the shape determines the overall form of the clump. So 0.5 is usually a pretty good midpoint value, but you can concentrate the clump effect closer to just the tip of the barbs by increasing this value, or allow the clumping to affect more of the overall barb by making it closer to 0. Tip spread allows you to keep the clumping effect, but then allow the tips of the barbs to be fanned out or randomized a little bit more. So next we have distance fall off and distance threshold. These control the resulting shape from the clumps that are generated. So first I would start with distance threshold. This controls how much of the adjacent barbs each clump can pull in. So originally we had our clumps spaced out every 2 centimeters, and right now we're using all of the clumps. So I'm going to change this mask value to be around 0.75 so we can see what happens to the unclumped feathers. So the distance threshold determines how far each clump can reach to pull in more barbs. So if you increase this, it'll grab more and more barbs until there are basically none left to grab, and they're all included in whatever clumps have been generated. Whereas the distance fall off determines of the barbs that are being grabbed by this threshold, how are they smoothing into the existing clump. So adding a higher value will make this transition smoother, whereas a lower value will make the fall off sharper. So I'm just going to adjust these settings to make them a little more appealing. So the random offset just changes how the clumps are rotated around the quill shape as well. So in addition to clumping the feathers along the length of the quill, it also can just offset them in a different direction, just to give them some more variation. And you could repeat changing these settings to get an effect on the other side, so I'm going to do that now. And lastly, we have preserve barb length. So just controls whether or not the clump modifier is allowed to change the length of the barbs or if they must stay the same length after they've been clumped. So this gives slightly different effects depending upon what clumping settings you have. So for the tuft, you can control the amount that each side of the feather gets. So you can have more or less tuft. Duplicates controls how many times these little tuft fibers are duplicated, so if they look too sparse, you can add a couple more copies to help fill them in. And the resolution setting controls how many times the clump fibers are subdivided, so this can help smooth it out and make sure you have enough resolution to help support the frizz effect. And then you have offset random, so if you choose to make duplicate copies, this will help just offset them slightly from each other. Just be careful with this setting. If you make it the value too high, they will be floating. I'm going to try to improve that for the next update in this feather generator. Next, we have the tuft shape. So there are some additional settings to control its rotation. So you have the angularity, so which way it's facing along the quill. There's the amount of spreading, so you can fan it out or kind of crumple it together. There's random rotation on the X, and random rotation on the Z as well. And you can change the random seed to get some different results from the randomization. Lastly, we have the scale of the tuft. So by default, the tuft will inherit the bend that the barbs have, but if you don't want that, you can choose to flatten it out. Next, you can change the scale of each side. So if you change the scale of the barbs on one side, you can adjust this to make it match or do something different. And then you can still tweak the overall length of the tuft independently of the other barbs to make it a little bit longer or shorter, and add randomness to the length of it as well. And there's a random seed control to just cycle through different options. Lastly, we have the frizz settings for the tuft, so that just controls how random the curves are here or how messy they are. So the factor controls the overall intensity of the effect, so you can have no frizz or all of the frizz. Distance is how intense the frizz effect is, so a higher value will cause more chaos and a lower value will be less chaotic. And then the shape kind of controls how the frizz effect is distributed along the tuft fibers here. And then the random seed controls the randomness here. And there are also the cumulative offset and preserve length settings here that you can toggle just to try some different results and see if you like one better than the other. So next we're going to go over some additional controls for the feather generator that couldn't be included in the modifier panel here. So we're going to need to open the geometry nodes graph that's attached to the feather. Okay, so this will show the entire feather graph, but you don't need to worry about the majority of this. There is a section in orange here called user controls, and this is the only place that you'll need to look to adjust the settings. So first we have the quill radius. So this relates to the radius that you set for the quill here. The way you read this graph is on the horizontal axis here, the left is the bottom of the quill and the right is the top of the quill, and then everything in between these 2 points is everything between the bottom and the top of the quill here. So by default, this is set to a decent quill shape, so if you don't like to edit this, you don't have to. The vertical axis of the graph is how much of the total radius value that part of the quill has. So we can see the bottom here has about half of the radius value, and the top has maybe about less than a quarter. And then the thickest part of the quill is sort of close to the bottom. It's like at this section here. So we can just adjust these values to customize it. And if you get this issue where you can't adjust the graph, double check up here where the generator name is listed, and if it's packed, just click this pack icon to unpack it. And then you should be able to edit the graph. So we'll just adjust this value, and you can see it's controlling the thickness of the quill here. A couple tips for dealing with any of these graphs here is if you're having trouble just controlling the graph and accidentally moving it and dragging it around, you can select the node in your editor here and then press the N key, And in the side panel, there should be a node tab, and you can actually open the graph here as well. And then when you're trying to control the points, you won't have to worry about accidentally moving the node itself. Secondly, if you are having trouble figuring out where on the quill or the barbs you're adjusting a value, sometimes it can be easier if you change this handle type to this vector handle, and it'll make it a little more obvious sometimes where you're making a change, or to just dial in a value. And then once you're happy with the value, you can leave it as is or just change it back to an auto handle, and it'll help kind of smooth things out. Okay, so next we have the custom length for the tufts. So this is controlling the overall length of these tuft fibers here. So again, it's formatted in the same way. On the horizontal axis, the left is the bottom part of the tufts, and then the right is the tufts towards the top. And this allows you to control the overall length of the tufts, so you can make them longer or shorter, and you can click and add more points to allow you to adjust it with more detail and customize the shape of the tuft. Next, we have the barb length. So for this, there are two options. You can adjust the length of the barbs for both sides together with a singular graph here. So each side will be symmetrical basically. Or you can adjust each side separately. And all of these graphs work exactly the same way. So I'm just going to show you adjusting the barb length when it's symmetrical. And you can toggle between these two options by either enabling or disabling the symmetrical length. So by default, it's enabled, which means you'll be using option A. But if you disable it, that means you'll be using option B, which is these two graphs here for the barbs left and the barbs right. So adjusting the length of the barbs can be a little bit tricky because of the way they are rotated. So on the base of the quill, they're sticking out relatively horizontally versus towards the top of the quill, they are rotated to be almost vertical. The point on this graph for the barb that you're adjusting has more to do where it's connected to the quill rather than where the tip of the barb is. So even if I'm adjusting the barbs at the very tip here, they're originating from this part of the quill. And so the shape that you create in this graph is not going to align one-to-one with what you're seeing in the 3D viewport. So it'll take a little bit of experimentation to get used to adjusting the overall profile of the feather this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this feather so the tip of it is more rounded. And to do this, I'm going to first change the handle to a vector handle. I think this makes it a lot easier. And I'm going to drag this down to make it shorter. And we can make it even shorter, I think. Something like this. And let's just smooth it out a little bit. So I'll add another point. It's gonna be a little bit tricky. I think we want this over here. We have our clumps changing the length, so unless we go back into our styling settings there, it's gonna be a little bit disjointed at the top, but I think that makes a pretty decent rounded feather. An easy way to reset the points that you have put on the graph, if there's a lot or something's gone wrong, is this little drop down menu. You can reset the curve or reset the view depending upon what's happened. So one thing to just be aware of is if you make multiple feathers by, say, duplicating this mesh, the modifier settings in here won't be shared between the two feathers, but the graph settings will be. When you create duplicate feather objects, make sure that you first click this number here in the graph to make a new unique graph for each feather. So that way, when you adjust these settings, they are no longer shared. Otherwise, you would adjust this one graph for, say, the silhouette, and then it would change the shape of both feathers that are sharing the data block. So just be aware of that. So those are all the settings for the feather itself. And lastly, we have the materials. So I'm going to just change over the viewport so we can look at the shader setup. So first, in order for these materials to work, you're going to have to add the material slots to the mesh object. So if you go down to the materials tab, just press the plus icon twice because we'll need 2 material slots. And then in the first material slot, select feather quill. And then in the second material slot, select feather barbs. So after you have added these materials, you may see that they can't be edited. If that's the case, again, it just has to do with this packed data. So just click this block to unpack it. And it updated the material in here automatically, but just make sure that that is the case for you as well. Otherwise, you won't see any changes that you're making in the material happening on the feather itself. I'm just going to unpack the barbs as well. So for the feather quill, it has a built-in mask. And this is a black and white mask where it's black at the bottom of the quill and white at the top. So you can use this to build any extra shader effects that you might want. Similarly, the feather barbs material also has a couple of built-in masks as well. So each of the sides are individually masked, so you can control them separately in the material. The barbs also have a factor map, so that goes from black to white. Black is at the bottom of the barb and white is at the end of the barb. There's also another factor for the barbs where they are darker towards the base of the feather, and then the mask is white towards the top of the feather. There's the random ID mask that you can use, as well as a separate mask for the tuft. In order to collapse the modifier, you can just apply the modifier in the modifiers panel, or you can right-click on your feather and convert it to a mesh. And all of the material attributes are baked into the vertex data of the feather, so your material and shaders should still work. Also, I'm still new at using geometry nodes, so some of these things may not be perfect, so if you have any issues, comments, or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy using the feather generator and that is helpful to your workflow. In part 2 of this video series, I am going to go over how to bake feather cards from these generated feathers in Blender. And then after that, these feathers were made as a utility for helping with a larger generator that I have made for character wings. So I look forward to sharing that with you as well, and see you next time.